Dear Reddit, what is the most WTF thing a friend or relative has done? More of an acquaintance, but one of my friends threw a party in 8th grade. Yeah, we were youngins, and the weird kid ended up finding out about it. Shows up out of nowhere and no one wanted to be rude about it, so he just chilled in the corner for about 30 minutes. We let him be, but then I noticed that he had left his little spot on the couch. I couldn't find him anywhere until I checked the host's room, and there he was, naked, fingering the host's dog. I was so ducking done with everything in that moment. Aunt tried to sell her pyramid scheme at my uncle's funeral to his widow. I was going to say date an ex of mine, but clearly this thread has been taken to a different level. While I was in high school, my mother did drugs with and had sex with my friends. During my mother's final week as she was dying of cancer and in hospice, her mother and younger sister came to see her. Those two live in Florida in a trailer park, right next door to each other. We hadn't seen much of them in years. They spent the whole time she was dying complaining that my father was ruining their lives by asking that my aunt's young daughter not be allowed to run around screaming in the hospice center, and itching that my mum, agnostic, wanted an Irish wake memorial service instead of a Southern Baptist funeral. They accused my grieving dad of trying to keep them from seeing her while simultaneously trying to get him to give them money. When my mom passed, we, by way of mom's wonderful older sister, called them to let them know it was time to say goodbye the final viewing before she was cremated. We knew they were still in town, but they didn't answer the phone. Later they called back to say that they were sorry they missed the final viewing, but that they had gone to Walmart instead. My father was horribly sick in hospital with heart failure a couple of years ago. My sister's, now ex-fiancé registered sign, said to me, on the bright side, the quicker he goes the more inheritance we get. Never in my life have I felt more hate for a single person. My grandfather murdered my grandmother with a shovel because he was convinced she was cheating on him. Dad returned home from school to see his baby sister covered in his mom's blood. Ended up in Father Hudson's child home where him and his siblings got beaten by ducking priests and nuns. Holy it, where to begin? My stepfather held a SWAT team off with a butter knife for 9 hours because he refused to surrender and no one wanted to go into the trailer with the crazy ex-marine. My father got pissed at his girlfriend, threatened to empty several semi-auto rifles into her house. Cops found him nearby with said guns and a lot of ammo. My aunt's fist fight at my grandfather's funeral. My mom beat the absolute out of my aunt after my aunt snapped at her one time too many. Bounced her head off every countertop and cabinet door in the kitchen. My grandmother too, parked on a clover leaf on ramp with a semi coming, which missed us by about 6 inches. Grandfather 1, the one with the fist fighting daughters, committed tax fraud. Let grandmother 1 take the fall with him when he was the only one involved. Grandfather 2 was a corrupt cop well before it was known that it could happen. Liked to take moonshine from illegal stills and consume the evidence. Also pursued a man onto a 2nd-story balcony and accidentally pushed him over the balcony. Dude left half his brain on the concrete below and never was quite the same again. Aunt that mother beat, abusive damned near anything that managed to find itself living on her property. Cousins 1 and 2 operated a drug distribution center out of Aunt that mother beat's house. Cousin 2 got nailed with 3 kilos of heroin, but avoided a lengthy prison sentence courtesy of a rehab program. My dad got arrested stealing a brick for my mum because when she was pregnant, she told him that she had a pregnancy craving to nibble on a brand new, fresh brick. So he proceeded to climb under the fence into a DIY store and steal a brick. I'm not even sure if my mum was 100% serious. Edit, he was drunk. About 20 years ago I had a close friend. Over time we drifted apart as we moved around, but if we were ever in our hometown together we'd meet for a drink. He was a fairly competent person. He worked as a DB admin, so not what you would call stupid, except for one thing. His weird belief that he could cross any road without warning and cars were legally obliged to stop for him. Myself and his other friends would challenge him about this and he would double down and state emphatically that the law requires vehicle drivers to give way to pedestrians. He'd argue, yes, that is true, but you are assuming they have the time and means to give way. Still, no amount of reasoning could change his mind. He did this all the time and somehow managed to never have an accident, until 2 years ago when he was killed crossing a dual carriageway that had a 70 mph speed limit. When my stepfather was arrested for sexually abusing me, the arraigning judge put an order of protection in place, meaning he couldn't continue living in the same house with me while the criminal case proceeded. He rented an apartment on the other side of town. My mother moved in with him, leaving me mostly on my own for the next few years. I was 13 years old. More funny than horrible. My grandmother was in the hospital, days away from dying. My uncle is in with her sitting next to the bed, holding her hand. She can't speak, in the final stages of terminal lung cancer. A nurse walks in and says, "Mom, are you nauseous?" My grandmother just stares at her. The nurse assumes my grandmother didn't hear and more loudly she repeats, "Mom, are you nauseous?" My grandmother won't respond. She looks at my uncle, who rolls his eyes, understanding. "Ma," he says, "do you feel nauseated?" She nods her head. Yes, a grammar purist to the end, was my grandma. Not one of my father's best friends growing up, was crazy into fitness during after high school, eventually became an Army Green Beret paratrooper, started a family, decided one day that he didn't want to live that life anymore, faked his own death by riding a bike off a bridge. Huge search party, no body was found but they considered him dead. Everyone in our small town is devastated. Father is super upset. Starts a double life. If I remember correctly, he found a recent kid that died in the area and took him name identity. Got married again, started another family. This time to a well-off doctor. Started some kind of housing company, I think in the Bay Area. Total net worth of this new couple is 2-3 million. Got bored and started fooling around with his neighbor. Ended up getting the neighbor pregnant. Second wife finds out. Start snooping around, find out his past, as in fake mailboxes. Figured out he borrowed the dead kid's identity, and his traces back to his original life, the Green Beret. Second wife goes to her father. They go to the army. My father's buddy get found out by the army. Everyone freaks out. Dead guy is back from the dead. He gets sentenced to like 3 years in army prison. Pretty much tells the army people that he could walk out of here if he wants to. 2 weeks later he escapes from army prison. While he's fleeing the police for 18-ish days, he robs a bank. He eventually turns himself in. Gets 5 years in prison. Now he lives a normal life. My aunt left her husband, my mum's brother, for my mum's other brother. Then my aunt got her brother and his friends to break into her ex-husband's flat to scare him. So my uncle, the ex-husband, got a sword off his wall to defend himself with. My aunt's brother got the other sword off the wall and killed my uncle with it. My childhood friend, who I no longer speak to, I think he is in the army now, one time completely out of ducking nowhere pushed his younger sister, about 4 at a time, down these very steep wooden stairs when we were at his house. I was about 9-10 at the time and I vividly remember the amount of times she barrel rolled and the sound of impact as she hit her head on the wall at the bottom. My friend just started laughing and passed it off as a joke as she was screaming in agony. Parents came running at freaking the duck out. Turns out she was fine apart from some heavy bruising and cuts. It was one of the last times I ever saw him. My grandfather was deaf, and after he died my family was organizing his documents and paperwork and discovered that he'd basically been trolling us throughout our entire lives. Turns out he was a Dutch immigrant and changed his name to a more English sounding name. And instead of learning English he just pretended to be profoundly deaf, which would also explain why he never reacted when people called him his new name. It was one of those I'm not even mad, I'm impressed sort of moments. My sister used to take one of my mom's car and pick up her friends and get drunk and drive around the small town we lived in. One night I was with my friends hanging out at these dirt bike jumps near the side of the street. These 2 girls that lived nearby that I knew weren't in good standings with my sister and her friends happened to be walking by. Now earlier my sister drove by and told me to get home because it was getting late. And the exact moment these 2 girls are walking by I see my sister and her crew in my mom's car, a Yukon XL, coming down the street, so I spin off on my bike and go to hide in the bushes thinking she's coming back to tell me to get my ass home again. As soon as I get to the bushes I'm waiting and I hear the engine rev high and I see the SUV swerve up into the grass and catch one of the girls like a deer in the headlights. I must have been 15 feet away hearing the impact and watching that girl get thrown into the higher grass and shrub. The SUV reversed as fast as it came and I darted on my bike home. My sister and her friends ended up ditching my mom's car near some family's barn on the other side of town. After everything it turns out my sister let a friend drive and that girl made her own decision to target the two girls. I don't think anyone involved really got into much trouble in the outcome. The girl that got hit had a broken ankle and maybe some bad bruising. Being randomly and quickly French kissed, man to man, by a close friend. While I was waiting at a red light in the car, he just sat there laughing. We'll never know why he'd do that. Sometimes wonder what his wife would do if I mentioned it one day. My uncle, 50 something at the time, and his son, my cousin, of course, ordered a pizza with some of my cousin's friends, and they jacked the driver when he rolled up. They all got arrested. Who the duck has nothing better to do at 50 ducking years old? My friend once skipped a resit exam because his pizza hadn't arrived yet. My brother once stole enough road signs and construction blockades to block off our entire street. He and his friends then hid in the bushes and waited for cars to come. They assigned a points system based on the driver's response, 1 point if they turned around, 2 points if they got out of the car to see what was going on, etc. It was like 20 points if a car ran the barrier. That never happened. When my sister was in the process of divorcing her husband because of a meth habit he refused to get help about, he suddenly developed fainting spells and fading vision that ended up with him being diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor and a short time to live. My sister let him come back home to be with the kids and generally felt like a retard for kicking him out when he was so sick. Then she started noticing that his spells started happening when she was going to go out with her friends or when she was going to do something that didn't involve him. On her birthday, her friends were going to throw her a surprise party that she never made it to because he fainted in the driveway and she had to take him to the hospital. She insisted on going into the ER with him, and while he was getting his MRI done, she asked the doctor on duty if the tumor could have grown more. The doctor replied, "What tumor?" Guy had been lying and faking cancer so that my sister would feel bad for him and not make him move out after they divorced. Told his kids he was dying and everything. Duck that guy. So my grandpa, father's side, was a pretty cool dude. When he suddenly died we were devastated. After his funeral, the whole family went to a restaurant. Kinda normal here after a funeral, you know. Sitting together, telling stories. Then I've overheard my aunt, Dad bro's wife, "I hope I'll get his Mercedes." Never in my life have I been that close to kicking a middle-aged woman in the face. Ducking disrespectful itch. Have I mentioned that she was mean to everyone and treated grandpa like it over the last couple of years? I don't wish people death usually and I don't believe in the concept of hell, but this ducking cunt makes me want a hell to exist and her rotting in it for eternity after a horrible death. Oh yeah. Now I remember something to add to her cuntness and why she hated us so much. So our grandpa had this property. She asked for it, but he decided to give it to his niece, who's a really lovely person by the way, which made Aunt flip out. She really didn't like that. Claimed she needed meds now because it upset her so much and how our grandpa could make this horrible decision. But even before she wasn't a better person. She only ever gave a duck about him when she needed something. Even typing this makes my blood pressure rise. My auntie wrote a suicide note for her and my younger cousin. She planned on killing them both and leaving my badly disabled other cousin alone in the house. Luckily someone stopped her. My cousin is now 18 and he doesn't know his mum did this. However, he is no longer talking to her because she said some horrible things to him before his birthday. Think it was she hated him and wish he hadn't been born. Luckily my uncle left her about 10 years ago and he is a lovely man who married a lovely nurse. When my father was young, his father would buy Christmas presents for his mistress' kids and display them under the tree. He didn't buy anything for my dad or his siblings. It was basically just one giant duck you. And he still gets angry when any of his kids try to avoid contacting him. What a narcissistic asshole. It would be somewhat okay if he was actually sorry for how he treated his kids, but he's not. My uncle, who doesn't live in the US, married an 18-year-old last year. It's his 4th wife and he is 65. I really wish I was joking trolling, but unfortunately I'm not. I had a drunk friend at a barbecue. Whip out his schlong onto the grill. I think he was drunk enough that he couldn't feel it, but regretted it the following day. When I was 16 I was upstairs stoned and playing games and just hear my mom yelling my name from downstairs. So I pop down and there she is, 3 empty bottles of wine and her best friend topless doing plaster casts of each other's chests. She just wanted to slow that she loved me. Chopped up a man with a chainsaw on the kitchen floor. My brother molested my daughter when she was a child. When I told my parents what he did and that he admitted it to me when I confronted him, and that he also admitted to still being sick and liking kids now about 15 years later, their reaction was to take his side and blame it all on my daughter. She was 6-8 years old at the time and he was 18-20. They also blamed me for destroying his life because we reported it to the police. Although as I told them, the alternative is to kill him. Now my parents won't ever speak to me or my daughter again. I guess it is all just one big WTF on so many levels. The case is still ongoing as I just found out a few weeks ago, and all the drama happened after that. The guy whose toilets were broken for 11 consecutive months, so he ate in plastic bags every morning in the shower and then hoarded the it under his bathroom sink in a big garbage bag and only sneaked it down to the dumpster at midnight on the night before trash pickup when it was overflowing. My step-grandmother burned all the pictures my dad had of his real mom when he was around 12. His real mom died in a car accident when he was around 10. My grandfather passed away a few years ago. So we were going through his stuff and I found a picture of her and was able to keep it a bit of a secret. It was pretty badly damaged, but I'm good at photo restoration, so I scanned it at high res and cleaned it up in Photoshop and made a print and framed it. I've only seen my dad cry twice in the 24 years I've been alive. Once at his dad's funeral, and once when I handed him that picture. My sister-in-law, my husband's brother's wife, whom everyone in the family dislikes, posted a picture on Instagram of the family land, mountain land worth a lot of money, the day after our grandpa-in-law died. Her caption read, "Can't believe this will all be mine one day. Inheritance." Little does she know, she and her gold-digging ways have been written out of the will. At a wedding, mixed race wedding, brown and black, when the groom was supposed to walk to the altar, instead of classy music someone slipped in some rap music with an awesome beat. But the lyrics were not safe for church. These are the lyrics. I have yet to find the actual song. More than get the anger in line. It repeated several times. Before the bride's mother turned it off, the whole church was laughing and in nervous shock. We never found out who did it. My uncle befriended serial killer Charles Ng when they were neighbors in prison. My uncle got him to confess to his crimes through drawings. Then my uncle saved them and shipped them to his lawyer every once in a while. My uncle testified against NG, but I don't think much came of it. Lawyer argued those weren't NG's drawings. My uncle died in a car accident where there was $10,000 cash floating around the scene when emergency services arrived. My family is pretty convinced he's in witness protection. His body was said to be burned completely in the car accident and he was matched by dental records. There's a book called No Kill No Thrill about NG that features my uncle and our family pretty heavily. My uncle was smart but misdirected. I hope he's doing okay now. Friend of mine caught his wife cheating multiple times. Instead of leaving her, he doubled down and had a full-out wedding later that year. A good friend of mine was dating a girl, seemed perfectly normal and nice, but was a bit of a nightmare when drunk. One time she took a it on the landing in his house. It now transpires that she is the new boss of his current girlfriend. He's a talker, so had shared that story with the current girlfriend. A few years after my father passed away, and while my brother and I were still teenagers, my mother came to Thanksgiving with my dad's side of the family. My drunkle, everyone has one, right? Spent the night flirting very openly and slightly raunchily with her. She reciprocated and even sat in his lap at one point. My uncle got locked up for helping his brother abuse a woman. That was pretty WTF. My father, who was a desk jockey in World War II, tried to get transferred to a frontline unit. Did he want to get to where the action was? Fight for king and country? Nope. He liked the hat that went with the uniform. My mum got secretly engaged to my cousin, her sister's stepson. They can't get married yet though, not until he beats his armed robbery charges. I had a neighbor in the late 1990s who killed his wife, began cutting her up and bagging the pieces, then ended up killing himself before he finished. Their grown-up son hadn't heard from them all day, so he stopped by to check on them and found the scene. Stabbed his girlfriend 9 times and left her to die, she did, with her 3-year-old daughter in the apartment. When my mother was diagnosed with cancer, my sister breezed into her hospital room and said, "Gee, thanks. I guess you increased my chances of getting cancer." In her defense, that was very out of character for her, and later she was like, "WTF was I thinking?" My dad told me later that our kitten that we had when I was in 8th grade didn't die when it followed my sister's BF to his car. Yes, it got ran over, but Pops had to use the shovel and hit it out of its misery. R.I.P. Howie. Edit. Words.